Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How are you doing? I genuinely want to know. How are you doing this morning? It is Monday. That's never a good sign. August 5th. Nothing particularly bad about that one, of course. But we're back from the weekend, and, well, I know that you know that you know that I know that you know that we know what's going on and what happened over the weekend. We are, yes, once again under the cloud of a mass shooting, and of course we didn't even get out from underneath the cloud of that mass shooting before we were under the cloud of another one, and the cloud that went along with not getting out from underneath the cloud from the previous mass shooting before the next cloud descended, that is a cloud all by itself. And then, of course, I guess we have to deal with the president, who is a cloud all by himself, and nothing surprising about that, I guess. Guess what? He treated a national moment of mourning and a moment that should have called for great sensitivity like an idiot, tweeting every once in a while from his golf club in Bedminster, New Jersey, where he had retreated for the weekend and stayed for the weekend and had pretty much nothing to say. Certainly, maybe it was best that he mostly stayed quiet. There was no point in his trying to comfort anyone in the country from the confines of the golf club. It didn't stop him, by the way, from finding time to drop in on weddings that were being held at the private club and posing for pictures and telling everybody, good luck, a wonderful couple, I hope you have a great time, posing, pawing at the brides, etc. You know, all the good things that he likes to do with his weekend. And driving around in his golf cart, as people were attempting one way or another to lay part of the blame for this. They were complaining, you can't lay the blame for these shootings at the president's feet. Well, that's true, because, of course, he keeps driving away in his golf cart. There's no chance to get close to his feet, and who knows what's down there anyway. He certainly doesn't. It's been a long time since he's seen it. Actually, if you laid the blame for the shootings at his feet, I'm not positive he was going to notice anyway. So, I would say I'd encourage you to keep going on and doing it anyway. Of course, the blame belongs at his feet for at least the first of the two shootings. The guy who perpetrated the shooting left behind a manifesto saying, I absolutely 100% believe in everything that Donald Trump is saying about immigrants in this country, and that is why I attempted to kill as many of them as possible. He was arrested without incident. He's alive. There's another guy, of course, and I don't know. I don't know if we've gotten anywhere. I do admit to being a little bit lax in trying to figure out what were the motives of the second shooter, because, like I said, I was slow in coming out of the cloud from the first one. I guess there are some indications that he is of a different bent, but I'm not certain how accurate reporting is on that, or whether I want to know, to be honest. So it was a rough weekend. It was, and we all experienced it, and we'll experience it some more. I think the president has got some plans. I read this morning via Twitter to visit El Paso and Dayton, the site of the two latest mass shootings, or the two that are capturing everyone's attention. There were others over the weekend, but here in the United States, we consider them to be routine things, these mass shootings, because they happened in Chicago. You see, we all have a little bit of a problem. Even honestly, even progressives have a little bit of a problem in how they regard these mass shootings. Although, I don't know. I think maybe, I don't know whether it's going to do us any good to revise the thoughts we have about how we classify mass shootings versus, I don't know what, non-mass shootings, regular shootings. I think the FBI classification of 4 or more victims is passé, unfortunately, because we're used to real mass casualties. It really takes a lot to get us excited about a mass shooting. Yeah, I mean, that's gunplay in America. And that's where we are. I did have a thought earlier this morning, just want to throw out there for discussion or just pondering even in the background. We don't need to stop and spend time discussing it necessarily, but I was wondering, as people in reaction to this shooting and others begin to call for things like let's go back to or re-examine the idea of a assault weapons ban. We did, of course, have an assault weapons ban in this country, or a ban on the sales of assault weapons, so that you couldn't buy new ones, but your old assault weapons, if you happen to have any lying around, were grandfathered in. They weren't declared illegal and confiscated or anything like that. But from 1994, when the ban began, to 2004, when it expired without renewal, we had a ban on the sales of assault weapons in this country. But that part I remember. What I'm having difficulty remembering is what tragedy, what societal collapse befell our nation during 1994 to 2004. What was it exactly that drove us to the brink of societal collapse, such that there was no question but that the assault rifle ban could not be renewed? And what loss of liberty was there? What criminal rampages were there that convinced everybody? Because now, of course, when you talk about limiting the sales of assault rifles in some way, shape, or form, the pushback from gun enthusiasts is, well, we can't infringe on freedom this way, and we have to be evenly matched with the criminals and terrorists, or we got to watch out for home invasions, and these are just the best weapons there are to fend off home invasions. I guess it's interesting that we have an experience. We've lived through 10 years is not a short period of time. 10 years with a sales ban in place, even though there were, any number of millions, I assume, of assault rifles and assault weapons of various kinds already out in circulation. But I don't remember there being this downward trend in public safety, or this sudden spike in crime that really reached the heartlands of America and drove people to the point where, they said, we can't, for instance, be holding a garlic festival or go out to a restaurant or clubs or, any of the rest of the various places where it's now, you have to now check for emergency exits and make an emergency response plan when you enter. My recollection of the period of 1994 to 2004 doesn't include any of that. So, I don't know. Maybe some of you have some idea about what might have gone so terribly wrong from 1994 to 2004 that we can't contemplate a ban like this. Of course, what did happen, I assume, is the organization of gun enthusiasts, both at the NRA and outside of the NRA. This was about the period, I think, when the NRA leadership was taken to task by the rank and file, so to speak, and then the place began to convert from a service organization serving, well, for one thing, gun safety and the rights of individual gun owners, to a manufacturer's cartel. But I guess that was about the time that they began converting into a maximalist organization, and they spent the 10 years, I guess, making the political environment impossible for a renewal of the ban. I also kind of wonder about, maybe we thought it was good policy just generally to sunset the ban from a lowercase l liberal point of view when designing it the first time around. Well, let's experiment. Let's do it for 10 years, and then we'll revisit it, and we'll come back clearly in a period when we have demonstrated objectively for everyone what living under such a ban really is like, and they will be unconcerned with what happened during the past 10 years. Nothing horrible having befallen them. They will, of course, decide to renew the ban. But, of course, it was part of the Republican project to make it impossible to come back in 2004 and get the votes in Congress for renewing it. In hindsight, that one feels like a fairly significant mistake. All right. Well, many other things to round up, as you know, and Bill in Portland, Maine, had some thoughts about how we might approach the day. This show, Daily Coast Radio's Kagro in the Morning Show, now being live. It's Monday in America, and it's true, and it's not yet Tuesday in China, but we might as well take note. Pretty soon, I guess it will be, because things are happening there, by the way. But it's Monday in America. That's where we are, and we're out of time, so we'll have to leave it there. That's it. That's a pretty good way to start the show. Stay tuned for your favorite polka hits coming up next. Don't forget polka. You don't want to get stuck in a situation like that. All right. Many other bits of news to cover as well. Some stories that languished over the weekend because we were once again, under that cloud. The president on his way, I understand, not yet, but he's on his way back from the golf course. I think he's back now. And on his way to Dayton and El Paso at some point during this week. There's so much for God blessing the people there, by the way. Of course, now going to saddle them with his presence. And I did see this morning somebody taking note that he's on his way back to El Paso without having paid for the increased police presence necessary for his last stupid hate rally there. So he's already in the hole there. But you know how he is about paying his debts. So not likely to make any money on this one, El Paso. Other news over the weekend. I saw, medical news from the ranks of the Republican Senate Conference, or the Senate Republican Conference, depending on how they, I don't know exactly which order they use from that. But two members of the Senate Republican Conference suffering some medical setbacks over the weekend. I didn't grab this one, but I understand Senator Rand Paul had to undergo some surgery to, this is rather shocking and sad, to remove a damaged part of his lung, which had been damaged in that assault that he suffered at the hands of his enraged neighbor. So some fairly significant fallout from that. And, here I have an idea. I think we'll make this Kagro in the Morning doctrine. You can chalk this one up. Write it down. Attribute it to me. I think you should love thy neighbor. Try that one out. See how it goes. That's it. In 10 years. Now, that would have been something. If we had to have a vote to renew the Bible and organized religion every 10 years. We're going to sunset this stuff. And if it's working out, we'll renew it for another 10 years. But this one continues to roll on, I guess, unabated. So let's see. We have that medical news. So sorry about that one, Rand Paul. I'm sure you're going to miss that part of your lung. Nobody likes to have surgery. Another injury among the ranks. Moscow Mitch McConnell did not have a good weekend. He was driven completely crazy all week last week by people calling him Moscow Mitch and or Moscow Mitch McConnell. I think they sometimes enjoyed throwing in the additional M for the alliterative effect. But apparently he fell at home, I guess, or he was pushed by his Chinese pirate wife, Elaine Chao. She made him walk the plank, and he fell on his patio, the patio of death that they have there in Kentucky, I guess. It is too bad. But he fell, and I think he broke his shoulder. Did he dislocate or break? I don't know. I haven't spoken to the doctor. Not going to. So we'll wait for updates. But apparently fell at home and was injured. He had a bad weekend. They also had the Fancy Farm political, what do you call it? What sort of gathering? I don't know. Maybe there's nothing quite like it. Fancy Farm in Kentucky. I've never really known why they stuck with that name, but it's a big political to-do there, and he goes there every, I don't know. Do they hold it every year? I don't know. I don't care. You tell me, give me a newspaper. I'll read about it. It's not going to change any lives, whether it's an annual thing or biannual or whatever, but he had a rough go of it. Lots of people booing him and jeering him. He wasn't particularly well received there, but he had his crowd. You know, he's got a machine there in Kentucky, and then he had this fall. So rough weekend for him. But pretty soon, I'm sure he'll be recovering and sitting down in a chair. And as you know, you can't do anything to sitting majority leaders. Can't indict a sitting president. He's going to do some sitting, I think, too. Oh, by the way, we did see over the weekend that the Republican Party of Dayton, Ohio, whoever has control of their social media sites over the weekend, tweeted out their thoughts about, in the aftermath of the shooting, that they weren't going to sit around and wait to become a victim. They were going to go get their concealed carry permit and be ready to fight back in the event of an attack. But they did have a bit of a typographical slip up there. But we now all are aware, at least, of what the folks at in the Dayton Republican Party aren't going to do. They're not going to be sitting dicks for attacks. So I think it's a pretty strong protective position. And as you know, you can't indict a sitting dick. So I guess they thought that would be a good idea to try out. One of the better comments, though, by the way, that I've seen made about McConnell's fall. Oh, he has fractured shoulder. That's the, I guess I can read the actual news report here, but Mike Scully's comment here. Mike Scully being a blue checkmarked kind of person who describes himself as affiliated with the, is he cast? I don't know. I don't know famous people. I just don't. Is he in the cast or is he a writer? Simpsons, Parks and Recreation, I guess Raymond. Everybody loves Raymond, right? Looks like a professional funny person of some sort, and it seems to be working. But his comment on the McConnell fall, he finally brought something to the floor. Yow! Yeah, that's rather scorching. You know, and here's an answer here of a gif of a flamethrower being employed by Scout Finch on this one, and I think that's pretty close to accurate. Let's see. I'm just curious what the actual news report is here. I don't know who's okay. WHAS 11 on your side. They hopefully inform me. I love those syndicated taglines for local news. I guess this is a Louisville, Kentucky outlet because they've got the Louisville weather up there in the upper right-hand corner. McConnell suffers fractured shoulder after fall at Louisville home. Officials say McConnell tripped at home on his outside patio and fractured his shoulder. So he really went down hard. One day after appearing at Kentucky's biggest political event, Fancy Farm, there we have it, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is recovering after a fall. Officials say McConnell tripped at home on his outside patio and fractured his shoulder Sunday morning, according to his aide. He was taken to the hospital where he was treated and released. I bet he had insurance, et cetera, et cetera. And, of course, he can continue to seek continuing treatment from the office of the attending physician for free there in Washington, D.C. So lucky him. He's insured, and it's not a pre-existing condition for him. The patio is a pre-existing condition, but I'm pretty sure you can have that one removed. All right, so where else might we have to go for roundup-wise over the weekend? I think that pretty much, I don't know. I'm sure later on in the show I'll say, oh, yeah, some other things happened. But everything was pretty much overshadowed by the shooting, reaction to the shooting, et cetera, et cetera. So there were a few other ideas I had about coverage, though. Let's go over to Pocket and see what we can uncover. Oh, before I do that, I ought to run through at least a few items from this morning's front page at Daily Kos. It is, after all, Daily Kos Radio. My eye was caught this morning by the Daily Kos Elections Morning Digest title, which asks, who is Puerto Rico's new governor? The courts may have to decide. It notes helpfully for us afterwards. And we're always interested in that sort of weird procedural arcana. Usually you're able to answer the question of who is the governor of this state or territory pretty easily. what's happening here. It's their leadoff story. On Friday, Pedro Pierluisi, I'm hoping I've got that pronunciation close. Pierre, he probably just says Pierluisi. Pierluisi. And from, harkening back to like 8th grade Spanish pronunciation guides. I'm doing my best on that one. He was sworn in as governor of Puerto Rico after scandal-tarred Governor Ricardo Rosselló, a fellow member of the pro-statehood New Progressive Party, or NPP, resigned. We heard about that. We discussed it a little bit, pretty much in passing the other day. Why in passing? Because the situation in Puerto Rico is, as always, very complex. And as a matter of fact, Armando reminding me of that fact right now. I don't know if this is a story that is whether is somewhere you want to spend any time or not, Armando, but you're certainly more than welcome to do so. Issues more complicated than usual. Some pronunciation guides here. Luisi, I guess, is pretty close. Pierluisi? Yeah? Is that Pierre Luisi? Oh, really? Do you think we ought to... Is it so that the two-syllable thing, Pierre Luisi? Okay, I'll go with that. Well, sure. We can, if we can wait 5 minutes, we can get an explanation of it. Perhaps we'll do that, or maybe after the break would be a good time to see if we can investigate some of the background. The basic facts, though, just so you're up to speed, because this is the kind of story and the kind of time in history, etc., when you might very well miss such a story. But here's the basics of it from the Daily Digest folks. So we know that Ricardo Rosselló resigned last week. However, there are serious questions about whether Pierluisi should be in charge because only one chamber of the Commonwealth's legislature, the House, has confirmed him to fill the vacant post of Secretary of State, the job that is first in line for the governorship in the case of a vacancy there. So they weren't quite finished plugging him in there, and they didn't have the next in line successor's confirmation complete. But I guess everybody figured, well, he's probably coming next, and what else are we going to do? And I just thought it was interesting because just last week we were contemplating whether or not it was a bridge too far to wonder whether Republicans in this country might, if they couldn't get a bill past the House but had gotten one past the Senate by, let's say, abolishing the filibuster, for instance, and passing Lindsey Graham's desperate attempt to legalize the indefinite detention of children at the border. And if they could somehow get rid of the filibuster and manage to, quote unquote, pass his bill in the Senate, but not in the House, would they ever get to the point where they were willing to say, well, one house is good enough? And really, what's the point of having two houses anyway when it means something that Democrats will favor versus something that we would be upset about? Let's just pretend it's a law and or do it by executive order. Well, not quite the same, but it reminded me of it. That the Secretary of State hasn't been confirmed officially there, but they said, maybe one house is enough, or at least for now, but just because it was an extraordinary situation. So let's see. While Pierluisi said Friday that he'd resign as governor if the Senate voted down his nomination for Secretary of State, he suggested on Sunday that it might be up to the courts to decide if he can remain in charge. And it may very well be. Pierluisi declared Sunday, since laws are presumed constitutional, even if there are scholars I respect that say otherwise, one assumes office and then the tribunals decide whether the oath of office is valid or not. He puts a great deal of emphasis on the validity of the oath of office, which is someplace else we have been here on this show in the past. He also put out a statement late that day saying, due to the fact that I have been sworn in as governor of Puerto Rico, there is no Secretary of State subject to the advice and consent of the Puerto Rican Senate. Okay, so that vacancy again. Pierluisi added, that the Senate has every right to express itself over my incumbency, but he didn't say what he'd do if they gave him a negative vote. As of Sunday night, the Senate's still scheduled to vote on Monday, that's today, whether Pierre Liussi should be confirmed as Secretary of State, which I assume there's some chance that what if they decide that that's a moot point now that he is governor, or at least thinks he's governor, and decide not to hold the vote? Well, that'll really complicate things. The Secretary of State's post was vacant until last week because Luis Rivera Marin had already resigned as part of the same chat scandal that had also ended Rosello's career, which I guess we should probably catch up on at some point. Rosello nominated Pierre Liussi on Wednesday, and Pierre Liussi was sworn in as Secretary of State that evening, even though I guess he hadn't been confirmed. Okay, well, yeah, I probably will need some explanation of the politics of all of this, but we're about to head out on break, so we'll at least pause for that one. Let me get through this last paragraph here before starting up the music. The Constitution of Puerto Rico requires the Secretary of State to be confirmed by both chambers of the legislature. However, before he quit, Rosello, this is great, Rosello declared a law that exempts the Secretary of State from legislative confirmation means that Pierre Liussi has every right to be the governor now. This is a very odd situation, to say the very least. Again, I guess now this harkens back even more to the question that arose last week of what would Republicans do if they decided they didn't really care about what the Constitution said about things needing to pass both houses of Congress in order to be valid law, just because, hey, that's getting in our way. There's more to the report from the Morning Digest, but now may be a great time to give us 2 minutes to connect with Armando. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, broadcasting live from Puerto Rico today. It would be much better, I think, if we were, although maybe not. No one knows who's in charge of Puerto Rico. But let's find out exactly why the hell this could be happening. The rest of the, I guess I'll give you the rest of the backgrounder from the Daily Kos Morning Digest, just so we're aware of the various players. And Armando is with us and can give us some of the more detailed background and the motivations of some of the players here. We left off taking note that the Constitution of Puerto Rico, I guess, currently requires that the Secretary of State, how this is possible. This is really interesting. The Constitution says the Secretary of State has to be confirmed by both chambers of the legislature. Okay.
It does.
Before he quit, the previous governor, Rosello, declared, based on what we'll find out in a minute, but he declared it, that part is not in dispute, declared that a law that exempts the Secretary of State from legislative confirmation entirely,
No.
or just by both houses, any one of them, maybe the House works. The Constitution says both houses. Rosello says there's a law that exempts the Secretary of State in some measure from legislative confirmation.
I think the law that he's referring to, and I haven't researched, actually just allowed for an acting Secretary of State.
Okay.
Who does it, just like we have actings.
We got a lot of them. The New York Times writes that most legal experts believe that this statute, the law that Rosello is pointing to here, which was passed in 1952 and amended in 2005, is unconstitutional. So, because
read the way he's reading it, I would agree. I do believe that
it's
the
not hard
idea
to see.
is enacting.
Yeah, I mean, if the Constitution says, look, you got to be confirmed, and there's a law that says, no, you don't, all right, that a lot of people would
That would be
think
fairly simple.
That's unconstitutional.
I think the way you can make it constitutional, say, no, this really just refers to, doing the acting.
You know what I need to for this administration here in Washington, we'll need to go get the old SNL skit. I'm merely acting. I'm going to need that. I'm not the Secretary of State. I'm merely acting. So let's see. This is all about to change, apparently.
Every permanent Secretary of State of Puerto Rico has been confirmed by both houses of the legislature.
All right.
So practice seems pretty clear. But that doesn't always mean that's how the case is going to go, as you know.
Right.
But just some background. Pedro Pierluisi was the primary opponent of the former governor now, Ricardo Rosselló.
The primary opponent.
Is the father of Ricardo Rosselló.
Primary, like primary election or the chief opponent? Okay.
They had a primary in their party. They're
the
same party, the New Progressive Party, Partido Nuevo Progresista. That actually, in theory, is the statehood party, but it's, that's all show and blather, really. But they ran in a primary in 2000. I think they had the primary the year before the election. I think they start to do that now in Puerto Rico. Certainly, we're doing it years ago, and I was there. 2015, I believe, was. And full disclosure, I have a lot of friends who are in the Pierluisi faction. I'm not going to defend him. He's just as much of a scumbag as all the rest of them.
Oh, wow.
Well, maybe a little less of a scumbag than all the rest of them. But it was bitter because the father of him, who was also governor of Puerto Rico in the 90s, Pedro Rosselló, sort of divided his party back in the day. His administration ended in corruption and an electoral landslide defeat in 2000 to the other party's candidate. And it's been, this has been a simmering fight. Interesting enough, the current Senate president, Thomas Rivera Schatz, who is the guy who's caused this crisis. I think it's important to realize that if he had allowed a vote on Thursday, Pierluisi would have had enough votes to have been confirmed. But the president of the Senate,
he doesn't lead anything to the floor either,
would not call the issue to vote.
How's his shoulder doing? We'll say, watch out for your patio there, Tomas, or Thomas, I guess.
No, he's a real thug.
Wow.
And he has been close to the Rosselló faction for years and always wanted to be governor himself. I think undergirding all of this is the realization that the MPP, or the PNP in Spanish, is in dire straits and almost certain to lose the next election. So there's really just about a year of graft left to go for them.
Okay.
So being the governor for that year is how they can sock away some money. I know this sounds cynical and horrible and somewhat adding to Trump talking points, but there's a certain reality to this, that there is a lot of graft. And there was a lot of graft that led to Rosselló, the junior, Phil's, having to quit. I mean, yes, it was all the texts and whatnot, but it was also just there were major federal indictments on corruption, and it's all a replay of many episodes. So I believe the motivation is, Rivera Schatz wants to run, and I figure in some respects he wants to be designated as the interim governor. That's probably the price he would like. Or he certainly wants to get someone who's more pliable to him and his cohorts in there, including maybe Pierluisi may have to cut a deal with him and say, okay, you get some of the graft too. But the law's pretty clear. I mean, whatever the motivation of the president of the Senate, the Secretary of State needed to be confirmed by both chambers. I mean, it is a constitutional requirement. No law can overcome a constitutional requirement. So,
yeah, I don't see how that works.
But that doesn't mean that's how this is going to be decided. You got to count the votes in the Supreme Court of Puerto Rico.
Okay.
And that I can't tell you.
Oh.
I mean, I don't know how many of them are aligned on one side or the other of this factional fight inside that party. So, and then, of course, there are some from the opposition party who, I don't know what their motivation will be to vote, but it's going to be a purely political vote. And I don't know exactly how you count the heads on that one. We'll see. The president of the Senate filed a lawsuit this morning. I don't know if that was in the article you wrote.
It looks like they were contemplating it. I haven't gotten to it.
No, it's filed. It's
okay.
filed, I believe. I think he filed it this morning. I think I saw something with a number on it. Certainly I saw the prepared complaint ready to go. So there was every indication, and he's suing everybody and their mother, that this guy's not the governor. Now, I think it's actually interesting. Suppose this was a legitimate thing, and the Senate passes a law, but the Senate, that the House approves something, the Senate approves it. Of course, the governor has to sign it. Is the Senate's position going to be that's an invalid law because he's not the governor?
Maybe. Does he have to sign it, or is it like the federal Constitution where it becomes law even without the signature? I don't know. But
well, I'm pretty sure he has to sign it.
All right.
Certainly has veto power. So it's interesting what you're saying. Can it be signed? Can it be approved without him not signing? And when they make a deal, say, okay, you just don't sign these for a while and let them lapse and become law.
Yeah. Well, that'd be interesting.
Maybe that's what they do. You could be right.
I don't know.
Where does it end? I think
check
they
the
cut a deal.
Constitution.
The guy gets something he wants.
I guess so. I mean, they got
one way or the other.
I assume they have to have
what's amazing
governor.
is they didn't figure it all out before. Now, that, as you know, when Rosselló Phils, the son, said, I'm resigning, he put he gave himself 8 days because he knew that they didn't know who was because he had fired everybody, as you had mentioned in your reporting, that he had fired everybody that was in line, down to the Secretary of Justice, who has her own corruption scandal and said she didn't want it.
Okay.
Which I don't know if that. I mean, I guess you can turn it down if you're in the line of succession, right? And keep your post. I don't know if you can keep your post. I think you have to resign your post, don't you?
Well, it certainly seems that the acting Secretary of State did, but although the Senate, I guess, still has the vote pending. So that's really interesting. That'd be great if they should vote and confirm him as Secretary of State and say, now you got to resign as acting governor because you're Secretary of State now.
Yeah, I guess, and then you become governor by the constitutional means, and that's probably how it ends up. But I think, the Rivera Chats filed this lawsuit, which was interesting. So they're either still negotiating, and he's posturing, and he's a crazy guy, by the way.
Who is?
Rivera Schatz, the president of the Senate. He's a thuggish, really bad guy. As bad as everybody else is, he's actually the worst guy in the entire picture, in my opinion. But who knows? This is a struggle about the next year, because I'd be shocked if somehow the PNP won the election. I think they're all going to get swept out of office. That doesn't mean anything's going to get better, but they are likely going to lose. And we'll see. Now, the thing with Pierluisi, of course, that has progressives here, including Puerto Rican progressives. I asked, there's a guy, Javier Murillo, who's from Minnesota, believe it or not, but he's a union leader there, but he's Puerto Rican. And when he was like, yeah, what Pierluisi, I'm like, what, you want Rivera Schatz? He said, hell no. I said, I'm not sure what your choices are here. It's the frying pan or the fire. So it's not clear to me what are you going to protest? There's no good options here. But in terms of just the mechanics of it, I think if it was a fair court, obviously, I think it's pretty clear on the law, but that doesn't mean anything. The law doesn't mean that much in our Supreme Court. It's not going to mean
true.
much there either. It hasn't in the past, and I doubt it will.
It's very
here.
strange.
It'll be either decided to vote him out because they power played him out of there, and they'll get somebody else to be governor, and he'll walk away, or I don't know. But just the politics of it is more interesting because they had a week to work it out, and they couldn't.
That's crazy.
And
but we've, seen these things before. Actually, I mean, as exotic as it sounds, it actually reminds me a lot of the gubernatorial succession in New Jersey in the 90s.
All right, when Dick, what was that guy? What was that
Cody.
guy? Cody, Richard Cody.
Yeah.
When Cody came out as the guy that everybody could agree to.
Yeah,
and everybody liked him, and then he disappeared.
Amazing.
Whatever happened to Dick Cody? Or Richard Cody?
Richard Cody, I think he went back to the Senate, just serving.
He still in Senate
I
now?
think he's getting older now, but that was a really bizarre situation all by itself, mostly because from the outside, everybody's watching the I guess he's out now, or well, I don't know. He was president of the Senate. I'll have to look up his Wikipedia profile, but he emerged as this consensus candidate, and from the outside, everybody was like, "Oh, the wild, succession fight in New Jersey, and you know how corrupt that is there in New Jersey, and the Democrats' machine in that state, and da da da." And Cody came out smelling like roses. He was growing up my local state senator. And I knew him, and I met him when I worked in Menendez's office, and he was as much a scheming, backstabbing Democratic operative as anybody. There was nothing.
I got news to everybody.
Above the fray
Every
from him.
politician is a scheming backstabber. That's part of the job description.
Yeah. So no surprise. Yeah. I guess he's still an incumbent member of the state Senate. So he went back, and then he was president of the Senate until 2010, and then just back to the rank and file. But we, as a result, have Richard Cody, Richard J. Cody, this and that named all over town. In West Orange, New Jersey, everything's named Richard J. Cody. He spent the time as acting governor, or whatever the hell they called him there.
Naming things after himself.
Yeah, and building parks that they're very nice, and it's great to have them and everything. But basically, he spent the time doing the local sort of constituent service and infrastructure loading and steering the budget to his home district. And everybody said what a fantastic consensus guy he was, and saving the state, but just only because there was at the time a vicious fight between corrupt factions. And he said, "I'll take over and be corrupt." And we said, "Sure, go ahead."
The John Murtha of New Jersey.
Yeah, basically right. That's how I think that's a good description. But there he is. He's still there, and I guess still regarded outside of New Jersey as a hero of the state, even though.
Yeah, I know.
Nothing would have happened.
He actually had managed to. What's interesting about it? If he had tried to just stay and take over the New Jersey Democratic Party and sort of entrench himself, he would have obviously become just another dirty politician. So he kind of played. He played it pretty smart if you think about it.
Right. Oh, his chief interest when I met him in the 90s while I was working with Menendez was when is Menendez going to run for Senate or governor so I can take his seat in the House? So that was his original plan, just like every other politician. When is this guy going to get out of my way so I can move up and run for that, and then I'll run for the other statewide office that Menendez isn't in. And
Cory Booker.
Right.
I remember Cory Booker pushing Laudenberg out. That was always that was a little bit of a thing.
Right. So,
politics is something.
Yeah, pretty amazing. Okay, so I mean, it's as exotic as it sounds, and as likely as people are to try and chalk it up to some sort of
principled,
foreign tinged corruption style situation in Puerto Rico. No, it's regular American stuff.
It's regular American inter-party fight.
Yeah.
The Cody story is actually very apropos.
Okay.
Except they went a little further. It's like a government shutdown, where everyone's posturing right till everything is about to shut down. Well, now we shut down nowadays. But back in the day when they'd fix it at the 11th hour, right?
Yeah.
They didn't fix it at the 11th hour. They didn't reach their deal. So the fight has spilled over to the post August 2nd moment. And I assume they're still negotiating. And what Pierluisi said about, not saying what he would do if the court told him to step down, I assume it's just posturing. I mean, that would actually be a constitutional crisis, petty party politics or not. I mean, if a court says it, in theory, well, look, Trump doesn't pay attention to court orders, so we can't point fingers at anybody. Not that Puerto Rico isn't a part of the United States, but it's separate government. It's not like we're running this very pristine system where everyone is honoring court orders. I mean, I remember I don't know if you remember the family separation order from that judge in San Diego when the family separation story first started. And he enjoined them from doing it. And it turns out they've separated like 700 more since that order was in place. And nobody's doing anything. And just the other day, and again, it's a technical thing, but in the census case in the Southern District of New York in front of Jesse Furman, Jesse Furman's his brother, the economist. I forget what the judge's first name is. At any rate, that judge, or maybe I got it wrong. Maybe it is Jesse Furman, and the brother has a different name. Jason is the accountant. Jesse's the judge.
All right.
The accountant, the economist.
I'm sure you've heard it being demoted to accountant.
He didn't enjoy that
Accountant's
demotion.
now outraged. Okay, sorry.
Right, and there's a sanctions motion because they lied to the court. And they lied to all the courts, by the way. They should be subject to sanctions motions from A to the end because they said, well, June 30th, we can't. It goes to the printer. And then, of course, they all made that fools of themselves afterwards because Trump tweeted something. Right. And I remember the guy had to show up and say, first I heard about us taking our position was the judge was the president's tweet. Court orders don't mean what they used to mean anymore. Anyway, there's a sanctions motion, and they were late with responding to it. And as someone who practices in the Southern District of New York a lot, I can tell you that if I had done that, at the very least, maybe the judge would have accepted my late filing. At the very least, he would have called me in front of a big packed courtroom on a hearing day and just yelled at me and embarrassed me. Yeah. I don't know that that's going to happen to these government lawyers.
Yeah, I don't know.
Justice is not blind, my friends. I hate to tell you.
Oh, well. I think we'll learn to live with it.
I mean, we can't.
Have you seen?
New.
Is there an article on what's happening lately that you're referring to?
The extension thing. I'll find one for you.
See if we can find.
We'll put it in the
let
thing.
people unravel
But if
this.
you can look up, I don't know if anybody actually wrote a story about it. It's something us lawyers on Twitter were sort of exchanging points of view on. Max Kennerly, who also practices in New York, said, the judge isn't going to do it. He's not going to give him an appeal issue, yada, yada. And I agree, and he probably would give almost anyone else that chance. But in the judge's individual rules, he says very clearly you need an extension. By the way, this was their second extension. They had already asked for one that he granted, and they did it timely in the right way, which is you have to file for the extension 48 hours before the due date. And he says explicitly, if you ask for an extension after the due date, you're not going to get the extension.
Okay.
Well, they didn't ask. They asked for it after the due date.
And then they got it. So,
and they're going to. He hasn't. I don't think he's ruled on it expressly, but he's going to give it to them. He might. I think he might yell at them a little bit, actually. I mean,
right. Well, we hope so.
Just to show that, hey, I yell at them too, because the rest of us who get yelled at for this, that, or the other are going to be like, yeah, you don't yell at him.
Yeah, I think it might work in the judge's favor to do a little bit of yelling.
Yeah, a little bit of yelling.
Okay.
You know, at any rate, it's a small thing, but it just goes to this point of, well, what happens if Pierluisi, the so-called governor, the alleged governor of Puerto Rico, says, I don't care what you say. You know, I'm still the governor. I'm going to stay in the big White House called the Fortaleza, which is a beautiful old colonial house in Old San Juan, which was the center of all the protests. So that's where Pierluisi is now. And you'll see whether he leaves. My expectation, my prediction is that some deal will be struck. It could involve a whole bunch of things. For example, one of the things that happens, and it's going to be very important for the officials in that party, is who gets the best slots for running for the legislature in 2020, because they're going to lose seats in a lot of them. And who gets to get the good seats, the good ones, to make sure you don't lose, because they could. Puerto Rico has, just as actually an interesting anomaly, has something called La Ley de Minoría, the minority law. That is, no matter how bad you lose, you are guaranteed at least 1/3 of the seats. Like if you're the registered party, you get 1/3 of the seats.
Okay.
It's the weirdest thing.
That is unusual.
It struck me as bizarre, but there it is. They have two types of seats. They have the traditional geographic district seats, and they have what's called por acumulación, at large, that are subject to voting by the entire island.
All right.
And those are a lot of the seats. So generally, the victory isn't such that you have to invoke this minority law, but it's happened. It happened in 1996. I think it happened again in 2008 for some reason. I think that happened. No, it was 2012. I think that it happened again. But at any rate, literally, losers were winners because of this law. They said, well, no, you can't. You, the winning party, can't have all the seats. We have a third reserved. Even if the other guys got 2 votes, they get a third of the seats.
Well, all right.
It's an interesting law.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, it might have been an outgrowth of the sort of the general parliamentary rule that if you want to just throw out the rule book either entirely or temporarily, you can move to suspend the rules and pass something that would otherwise be against the rules, and usually requires a 2/3 vote. But if 1/3 of the legislature is automatically always the minority party, you can't just walk in with a majority and say, all right, well, we get all the free pizza we want from now on.
Yeah. My recollection is that law was an outgrowth of the first 12 to 16 years of the Commonwealth, when their George Washington / FDR, Luis Miranda Marin, and his party would always win 68, 69% of the vote. And it was allocated in such a way that basically they'd have every seat.
Yeah, so
or just about every seat. So
all right. Well,
so they said we can't have that.
I guess not.
One party rule.
How'd they pass that new law, I wonder? So an attack of conscience.
I'd have to look up. I don't know the whole history of it, but I do know that law. And I do think that's part of the motivation. Who gets to be on the seats? Which part of the factions are going to be guaranteed places here? Who gets to be in the geographic districts that are protected? Yada, yada, yada. Now, of course, a lot of them have, but, you wouldn't know this, but there are certain municipalities, Bayamón and Guaynabo, which are suburbs of San Juan, which are strongholds of the PNP. And if you are the candidate in those districts, it's a safe seat, so to speak.
Okay.
And who gets to get those? or who gets to be the mayor of this town or that town, because that's not just control of the offices and all that entails. It also is control of certain contracts and who you get to dole them out to. Look, it's a spoils system. It really is, and that doesn't mean it's bad governance by default, but it does create these kind of fights within parties and without. Anyway, enough about that. I'm sorry to have gotten that deep in the weeds on that stuff, but that's my view of what the motivations are.
It's interesting. I mean, it's clearly a fascinating case to the Morning Digest crew, and they put it up right up at top, and I can see why. I mean, it's just sort of.
I just think the whole coup d'etat stuff is way overblown. It's just
I wouldn't call it that, but. Yeah.
It's not like the people of Puerto Rico are stopping it. It's the president of the Senate of Puerto Rico who's doing it for his own nefarious reasons.
That's an important distinction.
The people in the streets are all against Pierluisi being governor. That's not the situation.
Yeah, and you could easily come to that conclusion without, if you didn't take the time to figure out what it was really all about. And I thought a good chance to remind everybody, we do that plenty here in the United States. And in miniature, it's happening now over the DNI succession, as Trump would otherwise be bound by statute to name the principal deputy DNI. It's pretty clear, black and white in law, and in the meantime, he's trying to arrange her resignation or firing so that she won't be in place to take the job when, I guess, did Dan Coates not yet leave? So once he finally
don't know
goes,
about that. Is he gone or not gone? That's a good question.
No one ever knows.
I didn't know he was there. So the fact that if he's gone would be news to me.
Right. Well, I don't know. I have to look that up. I have 1 minute to find out whether Dan Coates still exists.
All right, I'll look for that.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We've done our job over the past minute. Dan Coates is still there, is the short answer. I had to go to Wikipedia on this one, and as you know, because I read it there, it's true. And I don't know. I mean, I guess the odds are that it is correct to say, as it does in the last sentence of his introductory profile in Wikipedia, that Coates is slated to step down from his position on August 15th, 2019. And I guess it's put that way. It sounds like maybe he just said, I'm resigning. He probably said temporarily, or maybe he said effective August 15th or upon the confirmation of my replacement or something like that. I don't know what the language was. It's footnoted here, but I think it just maybe it sends us out to a couple of articles. It's got 3 footnotes, 2, 3, and 4. One linking to Trump's tweet, I guess, saying he was out. Another to a Reuters report saying, the chief aim of the report was to pass on that Ratcliffe was tapped to replace Coates, but that's done now. And then, what's this one? CNN report, Dan Coates to step down. Trump tweets as president announces Ratcliffe will be nominated as next director of national intelligence. So somewhere in one of those 3 articles is the basis of the August 15th date. I'm not sure which one will clarify for us whether he said or a successor is confirmed. That would be a dangerous thing to do in your resignation letter if you were looking to make a quick exit, just given Trump's track record on things like this. And of course, the Ratcliffe game collapsed entirely at the end of last week and into the weekend. I guess the latest on that, and maybe we can make a theme out of this, the last write-up of the situation that I grabbed here was from the Washington Post that came over, I guess it was on Friday after the show was over, I think. Ratcliffe withdraws from consideration for intelligence chief less than a week after Trump picked him. Lots of people expressing his non-tenure in Scaramucci units. Shane Harris, Josh Dawsey, Ashley Parker, John Wagner, all getting top line credit on this one for the Washington Post. Trump announced Friday that Ratcliffe, his embattled pick to lead the nation's intelligence community, and a terrible pick it was for all the reasons mentioned last week, was withdrawing from consideration and will remain in Congress after lawmakers raised questions about his qualifications and whether he had padded his resume. Trump's expression of the situation was interesting and entertaining. He I guess the way he expressed the way he described their conversation, you don't want this to go on for months like it would, and your name being dragged through the mud, and so they're so unfair to you, et cetera, et cetera. You wanna withdraw, don't you? You do, right? And I don't know if we ever heard directly from Ratcliffe. I'm sure he put out a written statement, but he didn't come out in front of the cameras and say anything, as far as I know. But it was essentially a forced withdrawal, is what it looked like. And that does lead us to the odd question of, can Ratcliffe, I mean, he can, and so therefore will, I assume, just continue to serve in Congress and on the Intelligence Committee at that. I mean, that's one of the big repercussions of the blow up, his naming, his subsequent shaming, and his withdrawal or forced withdrawal from consideration. In addition to, of course, being another of what Josh Marshall calls the dignity wraiths, the people who agree to be named to a position by Donald Trump, who destroys everything he touches, and whenever it goes really bad, he just throws you under the bus at the end. So, of course, not that he didn't deserve it. Ratcliffe rather brutalized at the end of this thing and comes away with his reputation in tatters, but he does remain in his seat. So let's see. Two things. One, I guess we're all just supposed to sit here and say, this person who's occupying a very valuable position on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and analyzing our intelligence data and having all sorts of whatever, I guess, security clearance or pseudo security clearance, whatever, by virtue of the office he occupies, is a complete dunce and serial liar and valor thief, by the way. I mean, I guess the whole stolen valor concept was meant originally to apply to people who claimed military experience that they didn't actually have. But I don't know. I don't see, it's not that difficult to expand that to, terrorism prosecution, for obviously, though it wasn't military valor he was looking to attach to himself, it was some sort of service valor that he hoped people would believe about him, and it wasn't true. And so I think of a piece with the stolen valor thing, which is supposed to be like the cardinal sin among Republicans, but apparently not here. And he's just going to sit and serve not only in Congress, but on the Intelligence Committee and supposedly analyze this stuff. I don't know how effective he'll be going forward, and it might be that the party opts to swap him out with someone who could be more effective, but I don't know. They're not going to be forced to, so maybe they just won't. But then it occurred to me that, what will he do with his time there on the committee? How will he behave in hearings? Which really led me to I thought the more important conclusion about his withdrawal from nomination. Everyone saw his dignity destroyed. Everyone saw his reputation destroyed, but we were already moving on to the next thing. But remember that when the Intelligence Committee brought Robert Mueller before them for that second session of the Mueller hearings, Ratcliffe got the nomination for DNI based on his performance on television on Trump's behalf. Trump's favored attack dog, his lead defender in the Mueller hearings, who did all the heavy lifting and water carrying for Trump, now turns out to have been a serial liar the whole time. And everyone should, retroactively attach that to their recollection of how those hearings went. That Trump's main guy in those hearings, the guy who took the job of defending the president and did so, in outrageous fashion, turns out to be a serial liar. I mean, I guess that basically means that everything he did in Trump's defense during those hearings ought to be considered in the light of his being a fabulist and a serial liar. I guess none of the things that he said in the defense of the president and to the end of undermining Mueller's credibility should be regarded as having a basis in truth. Unfortunately, you can't kind of go back and undo that. And he wasn't so spectacular and splashy that you could play clips now and say, well, that turned out to be a whole load of bull, because no one cares. No one was listening to what he had to say even during the hearings. But I thought that was of some importance. People ought to take note of that. Anyway, let's see. Anything else to extract from this Washington Post piece here? Trump said he'll announce a new pick for director shortly, but you know what that means. 2 weeks, very soon, blah, blah, blah. In tweets, Trump said that Ratcliffe was being treated very unfairly by the media. He was blaming the media for actually finding out about Ratcliffe. And that was an instructive moment in American politics again, too. We'll forget about it very quickly. But don't you wish, I guess this really tells us a lot. Every once in a while, we like to highlight just how crazy and insane certain state legislators are. And we sort of say, yeah, without the national attention of the newspapers, you very often find that there are people all over the place, and very frequently they are Republican legislators, who, aspire to national office. And it seems to be, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to be more of a Republican attribute among their state legislators. They just run essentially mini national campaigns. So you frequently will find that people run for even local office as Republicans by running as anti-abortion, anti-immigration, whatever, pro-Trump sort of people. And that works there because no one, the typical Republican voter doesn't have any other local issues. They don't care about anything except they're just angry about whatever Fox News tells them to be angry about. And so it works. But you very frequently find these bizarro stories about Republican locals or state legislators who just have this outrageous record and nobody really knows about it except the people, who may know them locally, but it just doesn't get any national attention. And then when they get involved in a scandal, they get arrested for something or other or whatever. And it all comes out and everybody says, how did they even get there? Well, it doesn't stop there. It's not like there's automatic national level vetting for people who are running for Congress or who win. Ratcliffe has been sitting in Congress with this inflated resume for years and nobody noticed. They noticed, I'm sure, down in Texas. There are frustrated Democrats who are down there who have been saying for years, I can't believe that they let this guy through. It's going to be such an embarrassment if they ever find out what a loser Ratcliffe really is. But we hope it does happen. And then it finally does happen, but only by virtue of being ready and willing to step up to top level, cabinet level service in this country. He was that close to being a cabinet level appointee. I don't know whether they consider DNI cabinet or not. I think they do, but it is, it's at that level. And he was almost there based on nothing, based on total lies. But of course, Trump is mad at the media because they checked it out. And one would have hoped that they would have done that on his way to Congress, not this far into things. But it's just amazing. And a lot of people had some good observations that maybe that's one of the wages of the death of local newsrooms. Probably true. And well taken point there. But yeah, Trump believes both simultaneously, by the way. He made sort of an offhand weird comment on Friday that somebody said, basically the question was, sir, and you know how that goes. Why does your vetting suck so badly? How come you keep effing this stuff up time after time after time? Was the basic gist of the question. It was put more politely than that. And Trump's answer was this offhand swatting away, saying basically, I let the media vet for me. No, you vet for me. You vet for me. He's like really insistent about it. I put a name out there and I let you vet. And then he tried to, I don't know whether he thought he was being serious or what, but he tried to say, well, that's how we have a very good vetting operation at the White House. I put out a name and the press vets them and we save a lot of money that way. He tried to say, which of course, I mean, you're not supposed to take them seriously and analyze it as a serious statement. No money is saved. It's the White House vetting operation for cabinet level appointments is not an hourly wage situation. Let's hire a temp and bring them in to do the vetting. Oh, but it'll cost us money. Why don't we just save money by just putting the name out there and letting the press vet? But even if they did do that and didn't save money, even if they concede the point that it doesn't save any money, it of course just says that we just don't take this job seriously. We don't vet. We're terrible at it. And then on top of that, of course, if the press does vet for him and finds a problem, then he's angry that they treated the guy unfairly. So it's nonsense top to bottom. I probably didn't have to explain that to you. He's the dumbest person ever in the entire world. And also he's very dumb as president. So, okay. We've had enough of that. All right. So here's the tweet, I guess, with which he dismisses things. Rather than going through months of slander and libel, which is all true, as it turns out, I explained to John how miserable it would be for him and his family to deal with these people, which he asked him to do nonetheless. When he didn't think he was going to get caught, he wanted months of slander and libel and misery for Ratcliffe. When he did get caught, now he doesn't want it. John has therefore decided to stay in Congress, where he has done such an outstanding job representing the people of Texas and our country. So there you have it. Forced withdrawal from that. Even by the tumultuous standards of the Trump administration, Ratcliffe's nomination, which fell apart in less than a week, was a spectacular flame-out. The Washington Post writers proclaim. The president announced via tweet on Sunday that he intended to nominate Ratcliffe as Director of National Intelligence to replace Daniel Coates. That was last Sunday. That came as a surprise to White House aides, who had not vetted the three-term congressman and believed that he was in the running for a different position, possibly Secretary of Homeland Security, arguably worse, actually. According to officials familiar with the matter who, like others, spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss internal deliberations, if there were any. Eager to show that he had a ready replacement, Trump sent the tweet after seeing news reports that Coates was resigning and Ratcliffe was a possible nominee, officials said. So even the resignation caught the White House by surprise, and then the nomination caught the rest of the White House by surprise too, because they're doing great. Well, what did they say? Well-oiled machine or whatever it is. Trump and Coates, former senator, ambassador to Germany, had a rocky relationship, but Trump liked Ratcliffe because he was a strident critic of special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation, and the two had spent time together at the White House in recent weeks, officials said. But again, I would like to add this observation. Trump liked Ratcliffe because he was a strident critic of Mueller, but, as it turns out, Ratcliffe is a serial fabulist and liar. So, was his strident criticism of Robert Mueller, in fact, fabulism and lies? The answer is yes, but I guess we are supposed to say, oh, well, we may never know, or something like that, or it's under investigation, or blah, 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 or wait for my memoirs. The answer is yes, he was lying his ass off, even there. Trump seemed to think the announcement would be well received because he is a dope, according to the officials, but key Republicans in Congress quickly signaled that Ratcliffe lacked the national security expertise that the job requires by law. Not that that mattered to him, but they could see his resume was thin. Actually, I shouldn't say resume because that's a very specific complaint about Ratcliffe. They could see that his experience was thin. They basically said, who the hell is John Ratcliffe? He's been here for like 10 minutes. He doesn't have what it takes to do this. What's his resume? Give it to me. And then they looked at it and they're like, that's it? That's all he was a prosecutor? Look this up. Is this even true? And it wasn't. Ratcliffe's colleagues, the text is going to jump around here while we make room for ads. Okay, Ratcliffe's colleagues also described him as one of the least involved members of the House Intelligence Committee. How do you like that? That's a linked piece there. So I guess there's a whole story about that one. Let me take a look at that. Trump's pick for National Intelligence Director is disengaged from committee work on Capitol Hill, officials say. And I don't see how you would have time to make up conspiracy theories like he did if you immersed yourself in your committee work, which would otherwise convince you that none of this crap that you were thinking was true. So that's interesting. Maybe I'll dive into that, or maybe we'll move on. And I'll provide you with the article so you can marvel after the fact at how disengaged this guy was and yet still got the nomination. By the way, this, well, in a normal situation, this would be a death blow for the central casting theory of presidential nominations. We put it this way. It's almost as if Donald Trump's methodology for making nominations sucks and is evidence of his moronic approach to life in general. That this keeps failing over and over again, and he go, oh, I'm going to pick the best people, and everybody looks like they're at a central casting. And it's almost like looking at the way somebody looks on television is not indicative of their abilities or job performance. And Donald Trump is living in a Mike TV fantasy world. Once again, letting the telly rule his world. And if your job is to actually, rule the actual world, maybe, approaching things as a responsible adult, for instance, would be the way you want to go. But not him, because nothing ever fails when Donald Trump does it. That's what we're stuck with. I don't need to tell you that. Anyway, so apparently he was described as one of the least involved members of the House Intelligence Committee who hasn't traveled abroad to get a frontline view of intelligence operations since he joined the committee 7 months ago. I mean, it's only 7 months, but okay. That raised doubts about whether he was prepared to oversee a sprawling intelligence bureaucracy of 17 agencies with a budget of about $60 billion. Records and interviews with former colleagues also showed that Ratcliffe had exaggerated his role in terrorism and immigration enforcement cases. That was the major story. All the points there already having been made. Let's skip down a little bit here. He did issue a statement shortly after Trump's tweets. He said he remained convinced that if confirmed by the Senate, he would have served with the objectivity, fairness, and integrity that our intelligence agencies need and deserve. However, I do not wish for a national security and intelligence debate surrounding my confirmation, however untrue. What? My confirmation, however untrue. Or I'm sure the debate untrue. To become a purely political and partisan issue, he said. He can't even write. The country we all love deserves to be treated as an... What? The country we all love deserves that it be treated as an American issue. Duh. Accordingly, I have asked the president to nominate someone other than me for this position. You didn't ask, you were told. Trump closely followed the negative coverage of Ratcliffe this week, according to a senior White House official, because it was on a telly, so he closely covered it, closely watched it. On Thursday, Trump began polling advisors about whether Trump could be confirmed and commented to allies during a trip to Ohio, which resulted in a mass shooting, apparently, that he was getting crushed by the media, in the words of one person who spoke to Trump. Ratcliffe felt like he wasn't getting the support he needed in the Senate, where Majority Leader Moscow Mitch McConnell fell down and broke his shoulder, and Intelligence Committee Chairman Richard the Traitor Burr offered only tepid support. Couldn't even get the support of traitors. Ultimately, Trump said he didn't want to back Ratcliffe if the congressman was uncertain about his prospects. In an exchange with reporters on Friday afternoon, Trump defended the White House's failure to scrutinize him. There's the vetting conversation. And then the forced withdrawal tweet. Okay. Now, here's where things really started to get strange. Trump said he has a list of 3 potential nominees who are all, quote, very well-known people. We'll see about that. Among intelligence agencies. And then he will consider them over the weekend. No, I'm going to golf instead. And possibly make an announcement Monday. That's today. So keep an eye out. Monday, maybe later, 2 weeks. We'll see what happens. Trump also indicated that the current principal deputy director of national intelligence, Sue Gordon, might serve as the acting director when Coates leaves office on August 15th. That would be what the law prescribes for it. Trump had previously been unclear whether he expected her to fulfill the role. By law, the principal deputy director becomes the acting director when that position is vacant. He had said, well, he's played both sides of the fence. Here's what he said on Friday when he was questioned about it. I like Sue Gordon. Sue Gordon is there now. I like her very much. I've always liked her, Trump said, adding, certainly she will be considered for the acting. By the way, that's an amazing thing. What part of speech is it that he's dropping every time? She would be considered for the acting directorship. For the acting. She'll be considered for the acting. Okay, and are you talking with the Russians at all about nuclear weapons reductions? We always talk about the nuclear. I don't know if we didn't discuss that because I think it happened on Friday after. And during the same exchange, he's on his way to the helicopter to go play golf. That he discussed the nuclear. We talk about the nuclear. We hope to have a deal on the nuclear weapons, the nuclear what? The nuclear, the acting, the nuclear. I don't know what part of speech it is that he keeps dropping there, but it's annoying. Others in the White House have said Trump does not want Gordon to serve as the acting director, and he's making all the moves so that she doesn't. That's another of the articles we have, and we'll move on to that next. Burr, as well as Democratic lawmakers, have objected to the idea of replacing her with a political loyalist and have insisted that Gordon remain. One person familiar with the White House deliberations said the president has considered asking former Republican Congressman Pete Hoekstra, now ambassador to the Netherlands, to return to the United States and serve as the acting director. To do that, Trump would probably have to fire Gordon, reassign her, or accept her resignation. Force her to resign, in other words. Trump could also appoint another official who has already been confirmed by the Senate to step into the deputy director role and then serve as acting director. So there are ways around it and ways to manipulate who's in that role when the trigger gets pulled on August 15th, if the trigger gets pulled on August 15th. Gordon is widely admired among Democrats and Republicans in Congress, and Burr offered a quiet endorsement Friday, which is why Trump won't accept her. Of course, I respect John Ratcliffe's decision to withdraw his name from consideration, and I appreciate him considering serving his nation in a new role, Burr said. As the White House determines its next nominee, I'm heartened by the fact that the ODNI has an experienced and capable leadership team to help see it through this transition. Anything else we need to pull out of this one? Gordon was in Utah on Friday, speaking at a security conference hosted by Republican Representative Chris Stewart. She did not address the controversy over Ratcliffe or her future in the intelligence community. Smart. But she did indicate that she'd been looking forward to retiring, which is supposed to be a opening for the president to get rid of her, I guess, in a way that doesn't look too terrible for her. Pete Hoekstra, by the way, let's see if I can come up with this one. I saw and I think retweeted a observation from Marcy Wheeler early in the weekend. I'll have to look it up, but rather than scroll before I find it, my recollection was that Hoekstra had an interesting issue come up when he was nominated as ambassador to the Netherlands. I guess he's not born in the United States, or was not born in the United States, Hoekstra. And of course, everybody kind of assumed that since he had served in Congress that he was a naturalized American citizen. And I guess, was he born in the Netherlands, or is at least of Dutch extraction? I'm not certain where he was born, so he lobbied for the job of ambassador to the Netherlands. Not particularly well received there, but he did get the job. And Empty Wheel, as I recall, pointing out that in his confirmation hearings, I guess they just decided to go with the assumption that he was a naturalized citizen, because she pointed out that he actually was unable to produce proof of his naturalization at his confirmation hearing. And I guess that didn't really make much of a difference because the confirmation hearing was being held under Republican leadership, and they didn't care. So they went ahead and reported it out, and then he was confirmed as ambassador. Yeah, here it is. Hoekstra would mostly be dogged by his racist record, of course, if he were up for nomination for ODNI, and of course when he leaked classified FISA info in 2009. But if he's nominated, it will give others the opportunity to report that he had no proof of naturalization when he got his clearance to be ambassador. How strange, the country we live in. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on it. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Okay, what did we mean by this? By the way, I left off. I did find Empty Wheel's tweet here, and down in the comments to her comment is Josh Marshall replying, wait a second, he really couldn't prove he's a citizen? And she's clarifying here. I mean, it's still worthy. She didn't misstate it in any way, but she says, not exactly. He had no proof of naturalization. I assume, she says, that he had been using a passport renewal from the time when he was a kid all that time, but for the ambassadorship, they wanted papers, proof of naturalization, not just citizenship. He didn't have any. It took some time for State, the Department of State, to find their own proof, which led to a delay in him being formally nominated. At least they did wait for his clearance to process before they nominated him. I just think it's funny to happen to a racist working for a racist, and I think that's true. It's a good observation. For people who are that and a birther racist at that we need to see the paperwork on this. And, well, there you go. More proof that the Trumps never have paperwork. Let's see. Is there more to it? I don't think so. I think that's all the clarification we need on that one. All right. So, that's where we were on Hoekstra. I guess, oh, by the way, did Trump begin making remarks? I understood that he was slated to make remarks around 10 o'clock, and I think I'm seeing Stuart Rothenberg must be commenting on it. And I guess they must have given him a speech on a teleprompter, and he got out there. And Stu's tweet here says, I guess a quote, his wife is watching along with him. It's like he's reading a foreign language he doesn't understand, says my wife, a retired college professor of Russian. So that's where we stand with our dopey president comforting the nation, I guess. Okay, well, I thought that was of some interest. Let's see. Keeping an eye on other issues, or I guess I had seen, let me see. Let me scroll through my stories again. I think we're done with the story of the, well, I don't know. How much more is there to the Ratcliffe story that we were reading? We got distracted by the Hoekstra side story. So let's see. He could serve as acting director. To do that, Trump would probably have to fire Gordon, reassign her, or accept her resignation. Trump could also appoint another official who had been confirmed by the Senate to step into that role. Oh, right. We did finish it up. Gordon had visited Utah and had wisely decided not to comment on various things here. Then there was the story about Ratcliffe being so disengaged. And then a New York Times story, Julian Barnes and Charlie Savage writing about Sue Gordon and what was going on there. With an update right up at the top, President Trump on Friday abruptly dropped his plan to nominate Ratcliffe, just so that you knew what was going on with with that nomination as you headed into the Sue Gordon story. That even as he was telling reporters outside on the White House lawn that he liked Sue Gordon, of course, The story really was that the White House was planning to block Sue Gordon, the nation's number 2 intelligence official, from rising to the role of acting director of national intelligence when Coates steps down this month, according to people familiar with the Trump administration's plans. The decision to circumvent Ms. Gordon, who has served as the principal deputy director in the ODNI, will probably upset Republicans and Democrats in the Senate. They have expressed doubts about Ratcliffe, and, they were borne out. Trump, did not allow Gordon to personally deliver a recent intelligence briefing. How about that? After she arrived at the White House, according to a person familiar with the matter, a spokeswoman for the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, Amanda J. Schoch, or maybe Schoch, Schoch, S-C-H-O-C-H, said Ms. Gordon was not blocked from attending any recent briefing, but she declined to comment about what happened inside the Oval Office. So she wasn't blocked from attending, she just wasn't allowed to deliver an intelligence briefing. And I'm not certain whether that's because, and it's not, they don't dive into it here, is that because Trump doesn't like Sue Gordon or doesn't like briefings? I'm not sure which one that is supposed to mean and which one we're supposed to attribute it to here. Let's see. By the way, with respect to Trump's remarks, Kate Sherrill says he's already done approximately 10 minutes, read off the teleprompter, somehow said Toledo instead of Dayton, so that's good. Thanks very much. All right, it's a good summary. And Toledo. It's like, don't you know there's no other cities in Ohio you're aware of? Okay, let's see. So then there's the back to the New York Times article on Sue Gordon. Opposition in the White House to letting her serve as acting director raised the question of whether she will be ousted as part of a leadership shuffle at the intelligence director's office that will be more to Trump's liking. The federal statute says that if the position of DNI becomes vacant, the deputy director, that's Gordon, shall serve as acting director, but there appears to be a loophole. The law gives the White House much more flexibility in choosing who to appoint as the acting deputy if the number 2 position is vacant. According to Chesney, remember we read his tweets last week, the law professor from Texas, who specializes, he says, in national security issues. Ms. Gordon will retire if told by the White House that Mr. Trump wants someone else in the deputy's role who could then rise to fill the vacancy created when Coates departs. Ratcliffe, an outspoken supporter of Trump, has thin national security experience. You know all about that. Gordon, who has served more than 30 years in intelligence posts at the CIA and other agencies, has not been officially informed by the White House that Trump intends to name someone else to oversee the intelligence agency until the Senate confirms a new director. But the White House requested this week that the office provide a list of senior officials who worked for the agency, according to a senior administration official, a move that was interpreted as another sign that it's looking beyond her for people who could be temporarily installed in the top position. When Trump posted tweets Sunday announcing that Coates would step down on August 15th and that he intended to nominate Ratcliffe, the president hinted that Gordon might not automatically become acting director in the interim, saying an acting director would be named soon. It may have been because that was his intention, or it may have been because he had no idea that there was a statute in place. Those tweets prompted concern on Capitol Hill that Trump would circumvent Gordon. The next day, Burr, who leads the Senate Intelligence Committee, expressly referred to the fact that he looked forward to working with Gordon, calling her a trusted partner. So, all right. Well, this more about the insider frustration that he's trying to go around the law and that nobody knows what the hell is in his head, and expressing various frustrations at not being able to tell whether he really was compelled to accept her or not. But I think probably at this point the consensus is that if he's willing to be brazen, and he is, he can in fact work out a loophole to force her to retire. You know, if she retires before Coates leaves, then she's not the principal deputy, and someone else would be, and there's no statutory requirement for who would become the principal deputy, and so that's the outcome that they're looking for in that one. All right. One other observation, I guess, just switching briefly back to the topic of the shooting, since we were taking note of the fact that Trump rather ineffectually has addressed the nation. Just wanted to hearken back to something else that we did on the show earlier. And by the way, it did occur to me as I was getting ready for the show, or thinking about the show last night and what we were going to do, that we prepared you well over the weekend. I mean, no one could be prepared, of course, for this particular weekend. No one, I would hope nobody would be so depressed that they would boldly predict on Friday, yeah, by the time I see you again on Monday, there will be 2 mass shootings in the country. But particularly with reference to the El Paso shooting, I do note that we prepared you well in deciding, I think, to make part of the Friday show. Was it Friday that we did it? The word from Yahoo News from the FBI field office in Phoenix, Arizona, letting everybody know that the FBI ought to begin to regard the right-wing conspiracy theorists, particularly the QAnon and Pizzagate people, but others in the same headspace, I suppose, as well, as dangerous domestic terrorism threats. And then, of course, there was domestic terrorism over the weekend, initially brought to you by, well, people in that right-wing conspiracy theory headspace, at least according to the manifesto that got left behind. So at least we flagged that just in time, and maybe you weren't surprised by the time the news reached you of the El Paso shootings. Anyway, hearkening back to something else we've done to prepare you, I had thought about this last night and tweeted out that it should be kept in mind. As we watched over the weekend Republicans twist and turn and squirm to try to blame the initial shooting, and then I guess probably the later shooting as well, on anything but either themselves and their racism and misogyny and all the rest, or to blame it on video games rather than guns. It's been real interesting watching them try and come up with alternative explanations, although the video game one is like going on 2 decades old now, and they really need to come up with another excuse. But I thought it was interesting because they are actually uniquely, ought to be uniquely disqualified from either one of those 2 dodges. That one, it's not Republicans who are to blame for this, even though the first shooter at least was a right-wing conspiracy theorist nut and specifically referenced essentially the president's own rhetoric about immigrants being viewed as an invasion of this country. He echoed that almost word for word, so they needed to dodge that responsibility. So they tried their best and said, no one knows what his motivation is, or no, that guy, he's really a Democrat or something. I mean, they tried everything. And then, of course, it wasn't guns that were the issue because video games were too violent, and they were the real reason for shootings like this. And mental health, the mental health problems in this country are really to blame. True, the president did try and go that route as well, and he's right. It's just that it's his mental health problems that are at the root of this. And there's more than just a supposition behind that. I thought it was a very weird combination of things to try and blame, given what we've learned in the past about Republicans and in particular sort of the rise of Trump. So I tweeted out that Republicans had spent all weekend insisting that the mass shootings could be blamed on video games and not on their guns and not on their racist, misogynist nihilism. But that's a particularly weird place to land because, as you know, as we learning about Steve Bannon, his original theory of political movement was that video gamers were the ones who could be manipulated into becoming the core base Trump supporters and early adopters of Trumpism. And I know we've read the article on air or one like it. Steve Bannon learned to harness troll army from World of Warcraft. That's the title of the Mike Snyder article in USA Today dated July 18th, 2017. Do you remember this one? I think we read this one on here, or certainly something like it, that Steve Bannon, before joining Breitbart, had been playing around in this field of online gaming and looking to mine it for support for a political movement, and that he successfully did so, and that he appears to have provided the bridge from Gamergate to Trumpism. And given how deeply rooted it was in video games, I find it, I don't know, what shall we say? Is ironic the right word for this? But it's as disturbing as it is ironic that now Republicans are, I guess Republicans themselves, mainstream Republicans, probably are unaware of where the hell Steve Bannon came from and where the hell his theories of electoral politics came from. But the truth is, I mean, maybe they're right in a certain sense. I'm sure that they would point at it and say, see, it just proves that we're right. But I don't think, you should get credit for pointing out that violent video game culture is where the problems are really coming from, and that we rode on the back of that violent video game culture to the presidency. But it's after that, it's not our fault anymore if it's causing violent uprisings in the country. So, whatever. Thanks very much, you treasonous bastards, for bringing that one and marrying the misogynist, nihilist, racist, disgusting underbelly of gamer culture to our political culture. We really needed that one. All right. I'll provide, I guess what we'll have to do is look up that article again and share it with you. Let's see. How did I search it yesterday? But Bannon, gamers and politics, and I don't remember how I searched it, but I've got the headline and we can search that up. There it is. Steve Bannon learned to harness troll army from World of Warcraft. How long is that article? Is it something we could quickly cruise through? Maybe I'll just remind you of it by reading a little bit of the lead paragraphs on all those things. But I'm at the USA Today site, so it's going to take me a while to scroll through all the things that pop up in the way. I love current online advertising culture. It's the best. Before Steve Bannon oversaw the conservative Breitbart News Network and subsequently joined then candidate Donald Trump's campaign, the chief political strategist became a player in Hollywood and World of Warcraft. Bannon's migration from banker at Goldman Sachs, which of course all Republicans hate, or all Trumpists hate because elitists and we got to stop the global elites, etc. His migration from banker at Goldman Sachs to his current post in Trump's inner circle is chronicled in the new book Devil's Bargain: Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storming of the Presidency, by Joshua Green, a reporter with Bloomberg Businessweek. And has he been out talking about this week? It's a great opportunity to promote his work there. In 2005, Bannon secured $60 million in funding from Goldman Sachs and other investors for Internet Gaming Entertainment, a Hong Kong-based company. Hong Kong's in the news too, IGE did not make games, but instead employed low-wage Chinese workers because something, China, they're killing us, trade war, etc., to play online multiplayer game World of Warcraft and earn in-game gold. It could be traded for virtual goods, which in turn could be resold to players of the hugely popular PC game for real money, Green writes. At the time, the game was published by Blizzard Entertainment, and it had about 10 million subscribers. And just thinking about the scheme to make money off of this stuff basically tells you all you need to know about Bannon. A disgusting bottom dweller right at the start. But of course, it got worse because he ended up polluting politics with this garbage. Some players fancied the idea of paying for goods that would take hours of grinding through the game to earn, but other players considered it a form of cheating. That's actually the less important aspect of the story. Eventually, Blizzard shut down the accounts used by virtual gold farmers, and IGE became the target of a class action suit by a player who said the company's practices were substantially impacting players' enjoyment of the game. Bannon took control of the company from Brock Pierce, which I think we probably even then said, is that a real name? A child actor who appeared in the Mighty Ducks films and, according to Internet Movie Database, was a consultant on an episode of HBO's series Silicon Valley. Even though the business plan was a flop, Bannon became intrigued by the game's online community dynamics. In describing gamers, Bannon said, these guys, these rootless white males, what? Had monster power. It was the pre-Reddit. It's the same guys on one of a trio of online message boards owned by IGA called ThoughtBot, who were later on Reddit and other online message boards, maybe 8chan, where the alt-right flourished, Bannon said. Green postulates that Bannon's time at IGE was one that introduced him to a hidden world, burrowed deep into his psyche, and provided a kind of conceptual framework that he would later draw on to build up the audience for Breitbart News, and then help to marshal the online armies of trolls and activists that overran national politicians and helped give rise to Donald Trump, Green writes. After taking over in 2012 at Breitbart News Network, it was founded 5 years earlier by Andrew Breitbart, who exploded and died in 2012. I added the exploded part. Bannon recruited, remember this guy, Milo Yiannopoulos, to handle the technology coverage. Like Breitbart himself, Yiannopoulos, quote, just had that it factor. Really an ick factor. Bannon said in the book, the difference was Andrew had a very strong moral universe and Milo was an amoral nihilist. Yiannopoulos devoted much of Breitbart's tech culture coverage to cultural issues, particularly Gamergate, a long-running online argument over gaming culture that peaked in 2014, and that helped fuel an online alt-right movement sparked by Breitbart News. I don't know whether we're getting anywhere with the rest. As a matter of fact, there's not much more to it, but probably a vein that we ought to mine a little bit more if they continue talking about video games being at fault here. It might actually be an opening we would like to take advantage of to point out how disgusting and cynical the whole thing really is. All right, so that opportunity exists, let's say. Let's see, I guess this probably worth some mention too, given the motivation of the El Paso shooter. Anyway, lots of people reminding everybody that Stephen Miller is a disgusting piece of crap and deserves to be fired, and won't be because the president himself, a disgusting piece of crap, depends on him for, I guess, the coherence of nihilist thought that becomes necessary when you wear a suit and run around saying you're the president of the United States. They would like to have some coherent thought behind the statements, and I guess that's what Miller is there for. But this article from over the weekend, emails show Stephen Miller pressed hard to limit green cards because he hates immigrants. One former Trump official said the White House senior advisor has maintained a, quote, singular obsession, unquote, with the public charge rule. Ted Hessen writing this for Politico. Just want to give you a flavor of what's going on here. White House senior advisor Stephen Miller wasn't getting an immigration regulation he wanted, so he sent a series of scorching emails to top immigration officials, calling the department an embarrassment for not acting faster. The regulation in question would allow the Department of Homeland Security to bar legal immigrants from obtaining green cards if they receive certain government benefits. The rule would likely be released in the coming days, according to a pair of current and former Trump officials, briefed on the timeline. The emails, and what about them, right, which Politico obtained through the Freedom of Information Act, shed new light on how aggressively Miller has pressured the Department of Homeland Security to move faster on regulations to limit immigration. They have no secretary there, you see. Critics say the new rule will be used to shore up Trump's political base in the coming election year, and that it's an illegitimate tool to reduce legal immigration. One former Trump official said Miller has maintained a singular obsession with the public charge rule, which he's argued would bring about a transformative change to U.S. immigration. At the receiving end of Miller's pressure campaign was U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service Director Francis Cisna. an immigration hawk with strong support from restrictionist groups, who resigned in May amid a broader Homeland Security Department shakeup that also saw the exit of former Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen and other top officials. In an email sent on June 8, 2018, Miller lambasted Cisna for the pace of his efforts to implement the public charge rule. Francis, the timeline on public charge is unacceptable, Miller wrote. As a matter of fact, here's a quote of him saying it now. Right, that's about how I expect it came out. The public charge reg has been in the works for a year and a half. This is time we don't have. I don't care what you need to do to finish it on time. You run an agency of 20,000 people. That doesn't really mean anything, but okay. In the message, Miller derided Cisna's overall performance at USCIS, the agency charged with screening visa applicants and processing immigration paperwork. Cisna was known for his deliberate approach to the regulatory process. In other words, the deliberate approach like Nancy Pelosi is taking. Well, that's unacceptable. Okay, but she's taking it for a different reason. It's an embarrassment that we've been here for 18 months and USCIS hasn't published a single major reg, Miller barked somehow in email. According to a version of the rule proposed in October of 2018, the regulation would allow federal immigration officials to deny green cards to legal immigrants who've received food stamps, welfare, Medicaid, prescription drug subsidies, or Section 8 housing vouchers. Why? Because cruelty. It could deny green cards as well to immigrants deemed likely to receive such government benefits in the future. How do you determine that? I have no idea, but they don't really care. They would just say, everybody has that possibility. So no green cards for anybody except for people who pay the Kushners, like the Chinese folks do in their investor visas. With Trump poised to make immigration a centerpiece of his 2020 re-election campaign, a new crackdown on legal immigrants who receive government assistance could energize voters who view immigration, even when done legally, as a fiscal drain and a cultural danger. And that sounds like about where Miller might be and all that. Well, so you can read the rest of that article on your own, but just to give you a flavor of what's going on there, I thought I would add that. Let's see, more stories we can get to later on in the week. But just for the record, I guess we'll also point out that the New York Times was reporting at the end of last week that the Justice Department has declined to prosecute James Comey, of all people, over his memos about Trump. Did you realize that that the prosecution was in the offing? Well, they decided against it, and that was last week. By Thursday, they had made this decision, and it had been reported. But in case you were wondering why this was the case, I guess they were worried about the various memos he made for himself. The Department of Justice declined to prosecute Comey after determining that 2 memos he wrote about his interactions with President Trump contained classified information. And that's interesting all by itself. And examining whether he mishandled the documents, according to people familiar with the matter. You remember the memos he made to his file, memos he made to himself when he was called in by the president, and I guess the president asked for his loyalty, et cetera, and he was trying to document this in case the president tried to lie his way out of all this and fired him and lied about why. And in fact, all of that did come to fruition. But I guess they said that these memos contained classified information, and his storing them in his safe at home was potentially a crime, of all things. So actually, I mean, I'm no Comey fan, obviously, and I don't really care whether he gets prosecuted for anything in particular, but I'm sure the Trump administration was looking forward to being able to prosecute him and be able to point to this to undermine his authority in exposing all the rest of what Donald Trump did wrong, either to Mueller or on his own or whatever else. Okay, just thought that was pretty amazing all by itself. Perhaps we can spend some time examining that. There's more developments in the Jeffrey Epstein saga, which we might want to dig into. And of course, we're late in getting back to the UK side of election manipulation with Brexit, Cambridge Analytica, etc. I told you I would probably watch that that movie over the weekend, The Great Hack, and I did. There's some interesting commentary that could be made on that. But now, it's time to turn things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And I can tell you a little bit about what's coming up on that show next. Mitch McConnell, Moscow Mitch, wanted to mock Obama and praise Trump for making America great again at Fancy Farm Picnic in rural Graves County, Kentucky, but a crowd chanting Moscow Mitch wouldn't let him get away with it, and then he broke his shoulder. On the rest of the menu, Brett Kavanaugh wants to make it even easier for shooters of mass destruction to obtain assault rifles. Republican-led voter purges erased at least 17 million voters in the last 2 years.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
How about this? More Afghan civilians have been killed by U.S. and Afghan forces than by the Taliban this year. And on the chef's table, Mexico considering drawing up extradition papers on terrorism charges over the shooting of Mexicans in El Paso, Texas. Oh yeah, invoking the international community. We'll talk about that.